Welcome all to the latest meeting of Talking About Socialism from a Marxist point of view. Today we'll be having a talk, broadly speaking, on the arguments for a socialist/communist program as opposed to a program which will manage capitalism. Wrack will be introducing for around 15 minutes, and then onwards from that until about 9, we'll be having a discussion. A couple of points of kind of housekeeping beforehand. The first of which is that this discussion is being recorded, so that's something to factor in before you're making any contributions. This is recorded and will then be uploaded onto our YouTube channel. And to anyone viewing on YouTube, please could you like the video and subscribe to the YouTube channel if you haven't already. In terms of kind of points towards how the discussion works, we do, generally speaking, have a 3-minute maximum kind of on each individual contribution, just to ensure everyone's involved. And I think the final thing I'll just mention before finishing off is that this is going to be part of a wider series, essentially for the rest of this year, which will concern kind of various strands of what will likely be your party policy, and essentially what we would say is a socialist answer to these issues. Will hopefully tool people for working within your party over the next few months. So I think with all of that said, I'll hand over to Nick now.
Thank you very much, Stephen, and welcome to everybody. Apologies, the video recording was set on gallery, which doesn't make for good watching on YouTube. I've just changed it to speaker mode, so that should be better for people watching on YouTube. So as I say, first of all, thank you very much, Stephen. Welcome everybody. We're resuming our Talking About Socialism from a Marxist point of view discussions after a short break for the summer holidays, and we're meeting today, Monday, and I think it can't go unremarked that on Saturday there was a gathering of 130,000 far-right racists, fascists in central London, the biggest ever gathering of the far right in British history, which should concern all socialists, all Democrats, all people of liberal thinking, all people that want a humane, generous, inclusive society. And your party has come at a very opportune time, but I will say that it's perhaps also missed an opportunity. Regrettably, I think through the delay in getting launched and getting membership and taking time, which some may argue is necessary, and clearly time is necessary, but there is a response, and there has to be a response to that gathering in London, because it will no doubt embolden others, and it will embolden the members of the far right to have a greater presence on the streets, to intimidate people of colour, to attack gay and lesbian, trans people, and so on. And that has to be opposed. What we've seen with your party is a response to the call from Jeremy Corbyn and Zara Sultana, both former Labour MPs, to their call for a new party, 800,000. It may well be that there are many more still who will join if we don't miss the momentum, if we don't leave it too late. But those people that have joined have no doubt signed up. They've not joined yet, but have no doubt signed up precisely because they see what is going on in Britain to their lives, the inequality, the difficulties that they have in paying bills, in providing for their children, in finding work, in getting hospital appointments, in getting places at college and university and so on. They see what's happening in Gaza with the horrendous genocide, the mass murder being carried out by Israel with the backing of American imperialism and its allies, including Britain. and the disgraceful behaviour of Keir Starmer and the Labour Party in backing it and continuing to supply arms to Israel, and stamping down and clamping down and preventing protest. So we have the situation where the far right can gather and only 9 are arrested, whereas something like 800 people, mainly old, have been arrested for wearing placards opposing the prescription of Palestine action. All of this, the daily experience of people watching the news, both domestic and international, has motivated people to sign up to your party. And for those of us who consider ourselves to be socialists, by that I mean people that want to see the abolition of capitalism, of the profit system, and its supersession, its transcendence by a new form of society, then this gives us the opportunity to argue and to persuade and present our views to a mass audience about what is needed. And so that's what we're hoping to address in the series of 7 or 8 discussions that we have between now and Christmas. And in this talk, I'm only going to be able to give an overview, not going to be able to give it go into a lot of detail. But the question that is posed really is, should this party limit itself to seeking to manage the existing system, which is capitalism? Should it seek to limit itself to winning a certain limited number of reforms from the system? Or should it, as we argue, aim and state clearly that the object of this party is to achieve a completely different new form of society, which involves and necessitates the abolition of the capitalist profit system? Now, there's all sorts of arguments that I'm sure everybody here will have come across, and actually some of you may share them. And it's important that if you don't agree with what I'm saying, it's important that you raise your disagreements, because these are important arguments. Will we frighten people off if we talk about capitalism? Will we frighten people off if we talk about socialism and common ownership and democratic planning? Will we frighten off if people think that we are communists? All these are questions that we have to address. And I'll just say in passing, because I'm not going to deal with this issue in this discussion, by communism, when I use the term, I mean the same as socialism, and I don't mean anything that we saw in the Soviet Union or similar satellite states, or that we see presently in China or North Korea. That, to me, was not socialism or communism. Communism, socialism is completely democratic. It is a society in which there are no classes, and we have no exploitation. It is the most democratic, it would be the most democratic form of society that has ever existed. What I'm going to do to begin with, just to set the scene and so that people can understand what it is we're talking about, I'm going to share my screen. So if you just bear with me for a moment. Right, now, I don't know, can everybody see that? I hope so. So what I've done is I've cut and pasted from the YourParty website the statement that was sent out, or that launched the call. And it's worth reading so that we know the parameters of the people, or the aims of the people that have launched it: Jeremy Corbyn, Zara Sultana, and those that are around them and are advising them. It's time for a new kind of political party, one that belongs to you. Well, there may be some discussion about that and the question of democracy in the party. There's various rumors that are circulating on social media at the moment. Perhaps we'll have a chance to come back to that. And then we get to the meat of it. It says the system is rigged. The system is rigged when 4.5 million children live in poverty in the sixth richest country in the world. The system is rigged when giant corporations make a fortune from rising bills. The system is rigged when this government says there is no money for the poor, but billions for war. We cannot accept these injustices, and neither should you. I don't suppose there's anybody here that doesn't agree with those sentiments, but I just want to ask the question, what is the system that they're referring to? Because for me, the system must mean capitalism. And then the question is, well, is capitalism rigged? Well, actually, capitalism works generally in the way that it's supposed to work. And that is that those who own the means of production, that is factories, land, water, machines, science, technology, transport, and so on, the people that own the things that we use to produce goods or commodities, they employ workers, the working class. And they employ the working class because the working class can produce a value that is greater than the wages that they are paid. And that forms the profit that the capitalist class makes. So the first thing is the system, the capitalist system, is a system based on production for profit, not a system that is based on production for need. The capitalist class doesn't care what they produce, whether it's a necessity or not, so long as it makes them a profit. And if it doesn't make them a profit, they won't produce it. They won't employ people, they won't put them to work, and they won't produce it. And they have to be satisfied that the profit that they're going to make is sufficient to motivate them to invest to make that profit. And we'll come back to that point in a moment. So they say the system is rigged. Well, if what I've described means that it's rigged against the working class, then yes, I agree. It is rigged. And that then, if we're talking about capitalism being rigged against the working class, an exploitative system that is based and survives only on the exploitation of the working class, it raises the question, doesn't it? If the system is rigged in that way, why would we keep it at all? Why would we allow it to continue if we had the possibility, the power to get rid of it and to scrap it? And more than that, if the system is rigged in that way, then shouldn't that be our aim? Shouldn't that actually be our aim, to scrap the rigged system? But then it says this, you see, we will only fix the crisis in our society with a mass redistribution of wealth and power. It doesn't say how that can be achieved, and it's something that maybe some of you will want to address. Who could disagree with a mass redistribution of wealth and power? But what does it mean? Will we still have rich people? Will we still have workers who are exploited in the workplace? Will we still have the owners of the means of production, the capitalist class, making a profit at the expense of the working class? Well, the next question seems to suggest that we will, because it says that means taxing the very richest in our society. So the vision here appears to be that what they mean by rigged is something that could be changed without scrapping the system. The system could be de-rigged in a sense, because what we would do is we would tax people. Presumably the idea would we would tax them more heavily, or some people might say more fairly. But it still means that we have rich and poor. And however much you tax the capitalist class, through their ownership of the means of production, the profit will still go to them. And there's another aspect which I'm not going to go into in detail, but there's a problem here because, as I say, the capitalist class needs to know that it's going to make a certain profit. And if it's not guaranteed to make that profit because it's going to be taxed, then they'll just hoard the money or spend it on other things. And so you have a problem within the capitalist system about how investment takes place. That means, so we've got down to here, so that means taxing the very richest in our society. It would mean that we would still have the Jeff Bezoses. We would still have the Elon Musk, the richest man in the world, who seems to be the darling of the fascists and the far right, and who look to him to save them from the elite. A strange situation, but put that to one side. That means an NHS free of privatization and bringing energy, water, rail, and mail into public ownership. Well, again, nobody's going to disagree with that. An NHS free of privatization, bringing those services or industries into public ownership. But again, the question is, what sort of public ownership? Is it going to be like the nationalisation of the 1945 Labour government, which was only a partial nationalisation, which was run along the lines of private industry with appointed people to run the businesses in the interests of the private sector? Why limit it to those particular industries or services? Let's take the question of the NHS, for example. We get rid of privatization in the NHS. Great, that's what we should be doing. We should be arguing for. What about the pharmaceutical companies? I think there's a figure that I've seen that the pharmaceutical companies in Britain make something like £12 billion a year from producing drugs which are used through the NHS. Massive profits at the expense of the taxpayer and the ordinary working class when they have to pay for their prescriptions, hospitals when they do the same. What about the banks and the finance companies that are still receiving the interest and the payments for the PFI that was introduced under Tony Blair? So we then go on. That means investing in massive council house building program. Again, I think there's a discussion about how much we need in terms of home building, because there are other questions involved in the question of housing, about in terms of empty homes, second homes, empty government buildings that could be put to use as homes and so on.
Nick,
Yes,
you're
we need
15 minutes.
That's 15 minutes. So we do need to build other houses, but again, who's going to build them? Why are we not talking about common ownership, democratically planned, of the building companies, of the engineering companies, of the companies that make the plant, the machines that are used to construct housing? And then this last one, that means standing up to fossil fuel giants, putting their profits before our planet. What does that mean? Standing up to fossil fuel giants. What? It's almost a meaningless phrase. My argument is that all of industry and all of the services that we rely upon should be owned democratically by society and run democratically and planned by society in the interests of all, not in the interests of a profit for a few. And because of time, I'm just going to go, I'm not going to read the rest of it, but similar points I would make. So we come back to this question at the top, a mass redistribution of wealth and power. Where does the power in this society lie? It lies with the capitalist class through their ownership of the industry and services that we've just been discussing, and those sectors that I haven't mentioned. They make the profits, and the society, the system, the power is there to defend that system. They defend it through the police, the army, the courts, the civil service, the people that are appointed, the corruption and the backhanders that go to the MPs in Parliament. And so what we're really talking about, if we want to achieve the sort of society that is hinted at in this statement, a society in which nobody is left behind, in which everybody is cherished, it means scrapping the whole of the capitalist system, which means, first of all, the working class coming to power and using that power to expropriate the capitalist class, to implement a new system completely democratic, which would include the right of recall for representatives, representatives being on a worker's wage, and any force in society which is either policing or defensive, completely under the control and democratic direction of the working class initially. The working class, in doing that, in expropriating.
Nick, are you able to wrap up?
What last sentence? Thanks, Steve. The working class, in taking these steps, would actually abolish itself, because nobody would be a boss, everybody would be a worker, and we would arrive at a classless society, which is part of what a socialist society would be. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Nick. So I think, as mentioned, now for the next, it'll be about 55 minutes to an hour. We will kind of open the floor up to contributions from others. I think, as mentioned before, where much as possible, we limit these to around 3 minutes. So, yep, George, go ahead.
Hi, comrades. Very good introduction, Nick. Thank you for that. I wanted to come in and agree with a lot of what you said and just kind of provide my thoughts on some of those things. Firstly, I think that if reforms were ever possible under British capitalism, I think there were some limited reforms after the Second World War due to quite an unusual historic situation, really. They're no longer possible. I think these reformists who kind of dream of going back to the 50s or whatever, and it's a utopia. But it's the it's if it was possible then, it's certainly not possible now. So I think what we need to be doing is discussing what's necessary and not what's possible, because within the profit system, as you said quite rightly, none of these kind of things are going to be possible. So I think that there are going to be some of the reformists, like I think Zara Sultana in some of her recent interviews and things has made some points about the failures of Corbynism, the adoption of the HRA definition, for example, and also mandatory reselection. And on those points, I think that she might be supportable as against him, but ultimately, a reformist program isn't going to solve any of the crises that are facing this country. I think we all know the capitalists are not going to legislate themselves out of existence, and that's really what we're talking about in terms of the level of transformation that is required to fix these problems. You're right to say about public ownership, the limits of that, and I think that the key question is the workers' control of these industries, and making sure that there isn't privatized pharmaceutical companies raking it in off what's supposed to be a public healthcare system. So I think all along the line what's needed is a program of demands which may not be possible right now under the capitalist system, but which are the demands which are actually required to solve the crises that can build working class power and confidence. And I think there are demands such as workers' control of production, for example, which you can explain why these things are necessary, and they reveal the limits of the system, because ultimately, capitalists would rather shut down an industry than allow it to be run by the workers. So I think all of what we need to do is fight within the party to achieve a revolutionary program, and struggle for that, and have those difficult conversations and arguments with the reformists, because as I've said many times, this is what's required by the moment we're in, and nothing short of that will be successful. This is our chance to try and build a significant revolutionary organization, or a part of an organization at least within Britain, and
Sure.
we need to seize it.
Okay to wind up. Yeah. Cheers, comrade. So the next person on the list is John.
I think one of the things about Corbyn and Sultana and their statement that Nick read out is the state that Mark said you can't take, after looking at the Paris Commune, you can't take over the capitalist state. You have to have a new workers' state. The second thing I'd like to make is we need a revolutionary party. Now, how that comes about, we're very small, but the thing is, Lenin was very isolated between 1914 and 1917. And he had, in 1914, I think he had 15 comrades in Switzerland meeting up. And that they were the internationalists in the whole world. Regarding YourParty, I believe that although it's got 800,000 supposed supporters, or perhaps even 1 million, I think it'll go the way of Enough is Enough. The campaign started by Dave Ward of the CWU and Mick Lynch of the RMT. That had 500,000 members, people on the emailing list, and now it doesn't exist. The next thing I'd like to say is I believe that the conference in November has been postponed until at least February next year, which will make it very difficult to select candidates for the Greater London Authority, the Welsh Assembly, and the Scottish Parliament. I think the reason is that Corbyn and the people surrounding him want everybody to stand as independents under a common YourParty umbrella. The final thing I'd like to say regarding Saturday's demo, it's necessary for the trade unions not just to send trade union leaders to speak, but to actually organise their members. They should stop delegating to the SWP's front, stand up to racism. The trade unions have got to intervene themselves and with their resources, bus people and put people on trains to demos in London. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Thanks very much, John. So next is Paul, I think.
Hi. Paul Gerard from Bury in Manchester, and a supporter of Socialist Alternative. I agree with Nick that we missed, or we didn't, but it was missed, the opportunity to mobilise the incipient YourParty on Saturday. I think if they can email 800,000 members asking them a rather patronising question about a name change, then they could have actually called for the maximum number to attend in London on Saturday. And I still think it would be a valid thing to call on the national leadership of YourParty to organise a rally even before a conference. I don't see why we have to wait for a conference for a rally to be organised, which will put its stamp on the political situation. We had a meeting on Saturday in Manchester with Claudia Webb, who spoke generally very well, I think, and she called for a party which is unyielding and militant. And I think the idea of a party which is absolutely uncompromisingly on the side of the working class is what we need to to get, because so many people say, oh, Labour's not for the working class anymore. And we need to counteract that. Just coming back to the main meat of what Nick was saying, I think Nick was right to explore the ambiguity in a lot of the YourParty statement. And you're right, it can be quite a popularizing idea to say the system is rigged, but it implies that somebody has rigged it, and it's been rigged by human hand in the way that an election might be rigged. And that, as Nick pointed out, is absolutely not the case. The system is working in that direction. The system intends to pile up wealth at one pole of society and to deprive the other pole of society of wealth. If you look at what it calls for, it's a kind of almost a watered down version of the programme that Jeremy Corbyn stood on in 2019. I mean, rail, mail, water, these are the things that technically Starmer was committed to do when he took over the leadership. And I think, if anything, it represents a step back from that. When you think about Corbyn calling for national broadband and, a national care service and things like that, they're not there. I think Nick is absolutely right to emphasise certain key industries. I think pharma is a good example. From what I read in the paper today or at the weekend, pharma, American but British companies as well, are effectively on an investment strike. They've already decided that their level of profit that they're getting is not sufficient to keep them going and to realise these ambitious plans for Cambridge and Edinburgh and places like that. I would actually raise the question of the supermarkets, actually. I think the idea of nationalising the supermarkets would be extremely popular because everybody knows they get ripped off. Everybody knows they're screwing the farmers and so on. And I think a programme of nationalisation, but with the emphasis on a democratic plan. What we're seeing at the moment in capitalism is chaos. This is my last point, last point, Stephen. What we're seeing at the moment is capitalist chaos. And I think the idea of a democratic plan of production would be extremely attractive. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Paul, for a very wide-ranging point there. Would anyone else like to come in? I realise I've been neglecting people, just kind of putting their physical hands up. But okay, Dylan, go ahead.
Hi, comrades. I think, bearing in mind Nick's comment, I think we do need to bear in mind and stress the fact that capitalism is a global system, because the YourParty manifesto, which Nick was quoting from, it talks about the system. It doesn't call it capitalism, but we've got to put in our propaganda this is a global economic system which is lurching from crisis to crisis, and that you could argue that the situation we're in now is very reminiscent of the 1930s in many respects, and those acute contradictions between the imperialist powers are driving the world towards trade wars and obviously hot wars. And I think that in our propaganda we should point out that American capitalism and its allies are in terminal decline due to the emergence of China and the other BRICS nations, which obviously poses those contradictions between the imperialist powers, which they're unable to resolve due to the constraints of the nation state. And obviously those contradictions are getting more and more acute as Trump's trade war develops impetus. And obviously it appears to me quite clearly that Trump is gearing up for some kind of confrontation with China in the next decade. That pivot to Asia that began under Obama is continuing under Trump. And obviously the trade war is like an opening shot in this growing confrontation towards Chinese capitalism. But obviously for us, we don't have any illusions in China or Cuba or North Korea, and we emphasize that our struggle to emancipate the working class and the labouring masses has got to be global in nature, and it can't just be confined to trying to carry out limited reforms to British capitalism, because that's woefully inadequate. And obviously the crisis affecting British capitalism is within that global context. So I'll just leave it there.
Brilliant, Dylan. Thanks very much. So would Anyone else like to come in? I should also mention that repeat contributions are obviously very much welcome as well. If not, if no one is currently got anything to say, if Nick would like to come back in to kind of discuss any of the points that have been made or expand further.
Yes, I can do that. I think all the points have been extremely important and very good, and will no doubt all be themes in the discussions on the particular areas that we're going to discuss over the next few weeks. So I'll just go through them in terms. I agreed with pretty much all of what George was saying, that implicit in the position of many on the left, people who I'm going to describe them as social democrats. Social democrats, people that you can achieve a fairer capitalism, which I think is an impossibility and a utopian concept. But they generally either say it explicitly or imply it, that what we really are opposed to is neoliberalism. A phase in capitalist international capitalism from the end of the 1970s through to today, really, with some modifications, but a period in which the capitalist class tried to take back the gains that had been won in the post-war period. Particularly, we can look at Britain and see how the 1945 government implemented various reforms, but it didn't go the whole way, because the 1945 Labour government wasn't a socialist government. You can see that in terms of its attitude to strikes and colonialism and so on. And there was a retreat even in the NHS, where they capitulated to the consultants in terms of their demands to be able to earn money outside of the NHS. But neoliberalism is a phase where the capitalist class, in order to try to maintain its rate of profit, needed to extract more profit from the working class, and basically forced the state to open up services that had been taken over and allow them to be prey for private investment in order to make a profit. But there's no going back to that so-called, or some people think, golden era from, the late 1940s, 1950s, 60s. There's no going back to that. I perhaps would take this is an interesting question that George raised about reforms. I agree generally that there is very little room for reform within the capitalist system internationally, but I would not rule out the possibility that through mass struggle, the working class could force the capitalist class to implement some reforms in order to buy time, in order to try to suggest that, yes, okay, we can produce the reforms that you're after. That would be to hoodwink the working class, and we shouldn't fall for it. Any reforms that have been given or might be given in the future as a result of mass struggle are prey to being taken aback unless we actually change the system completely. So that's the first thing. We fight for reforms, but we are not reformist in political outlook. We link all our struggles, whether that's on pay or anti-racism, to the need to change society completely and fundamentally. There's interesting points in terms of program, which I don't have time now to go into, how we act in opposition, which I think is going to be the position for your party for some time, and how what we would do is if we were in power. I thought John made some very good points about the trade unions and the fight against racism and fascism. There are 5.5 million trade union members in Britain. 5.5 million. That's way down since 1979, when I think it was almost 14 million, but it's still a huge number of people. And there are 47 trade unions that are affiliated to the TUC. If they paid into if you like, an anti-racist, anti-fascist pot, 50 pence per member, it would raise almost £2.5 million. And you could deal with the social, economic, political problems that are leading some people to seek solutions with the fascists, the far right, and the racists, and explaining in facts and figures what the reality is. So I agreed with much of what Paul was saying. We need our party to be militants of the working class. And I think it's important in terms of the democracy of your party that we achieve and insist and get the idea of representatives on workers' wages and subject to recall, and that those people that we elect into public office use their platforms as tribunes for socialism, tribunes for the working class. They take the class struggle into the council chamber or into parliament.
Yeah.
Yeah, all right, I'll leave it there. Sorry, other people have got their hands up. Yeah.
Okay, thanks very much, Nick. And John, you're next.
Thank you very much. Unfortunately, my system cut out as it tends to during Zooms. And so I missed the second half of what Nick had to say at the beginning. I really want to make a fairly general point, which is that I think that the left has, to a large extent, stood still ideologically, and really seems to think in much the same way as before neoliberalism. And I think that's a problem. As I put in the chat, I think that it's pretty clear that the far right and the people that they reach are reached by social issues rather than economic ones. The social is supposed to somehow explain the kind of immiseration that people are going through in their lives. But it speaks to an unhappiness with the kind of lives which capitalism requires us to lead. And we have to speak to that. Secondly, I don't think the left has ever got out of its pre-neoliberal economism. I think that we need to take the political, to take the state, to take imperialism much more seriously and start to produce better analyses of that. Because if we just look at the kind of things that we want to change through abolishing the economic system of capitalism, the state is strong enough to smash us, to smash a left government, to overrun any reform. But I will say this, there are some key reforms which need to be undertaken in order to disable the ability of the state to disable us. And that involves the political system itself. We need to abolish the aspects of the coercive power of the state through reforms. And we need to change the so-called representative democracy system. We need a constitutional convention like they had in Chile to draw up ideas about the kind of socialist constitution that we would want to see. That is entering into the realm of politics. And I think we need to do some hard thinking, hard discussing, hard analyzing in order to extrapolate from our more or less common understanding of Marxist capital and his political economy to looking at capitalist society and to looking at capitalist and imperialist state structures and transnational structures as well. Thanks.
Thanks very much, John. So next on my list, as far as I can see, is Richard. So go ahead, Richard. Oh, Richard, I think you're on mute. You're still on mute, I think, Richard. Okay, if it's all right with you, Richard, I think I might move on to George whilst you're just getting your things sorted technically, if that's all right.
Thanks. Thanks, Stephen. Yeah, I just wanted to comment briefly on what John was saying about that we can't just think we can get a left government into the parliament and they'll be able to use the state to implement some economic program without facing massive resistance. I think it really speaks to the need to rebuild that working class power, build it build it properly for the first time in a way, I suppose. In the unions, making it so that struggles aren't just sold out by bureaucrats who at the end of the day, a lot of them benefit from the capitalist system ultimately, and so they're not really interested in system change in the way that the kind of rank and file militants are. And also obviously the communities like I'm thinking in particular about all the people who've been enraged over Gaza. There needs to be like a way through that mire that doesn't just involve endless protests with like no tangible benefit or gain, because people will just get demoralized and worn out. So there needs to be a real strategy for like organizing self-defense, for example, against like the far right thugs that we've seen on the streets this weekend, against the police, and ultimately building it into a force which is capable of taking over the levers of the state's control of society, and actually smashing those organizations up, and building new kind of organs of working class power which could actually move us towards a socialist future.
Thanks very much, George. I see you're now unmuted, Richard. So do you want to go ahead?
Yeah, thanks, comrades. The first point I want to make is not the most important one. But I think that Nick and other comrades should avoid using the term taxpayers, because that's a term that belongs in a right-wing vocabulary, normally with people who are complaining about the size of the social wage. And the reality is that very many working class people are not taxpayers at all. School students and college students aren't taxpayers. The lowest paid workers are not taxpayers. So let's avoid the use of that term. The more important points really are that I want Nick to come clear on the question whether or not he thinks or you think that there is a parliamentary road to socialism, because some of what Nick has said sounds very much like TAS, the trade union and socialist coalition. And thirdly, I think what's been missing altogether from all of the discussion so far is your take on the way in which socialists should relate to actual class struggles going on the ground, such as the bin strike, for one example, in Birmingham. Because what we've actually seen in all the great upsurges of workers' militancy and struggle, starting in the beginning of the century, really, in Russia, going through to the German Revolution, etc., is that when our class is on the rise, it throws out alternative forms of government in the shape of workers' councils. Some of them began to form during the 1926 general strike. So really, that is the question I'm throwing into the arena, because in my book, if you think there is any parliamentary road to socialism, you're actually living in cloud cuckoo land and confining yourselves really, if you don't intervene in workers' struggles now, to a form of abstract propagandism, really. So that's my two pence. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Richard. I think the next person to go would be Soraya, I think.
Thanks very much. I keep getting chucked out, so if I do, just carry on with somebody else. So very quickly, I'll speak quickly. I don't think you can, just taking up some of the points that John Tumman raised, I don't think you can, the form of the state is a body of capitalism to protect the interests of capitalism. So I don't think you can abolish the coercive power of the state through reforms. I mean, obviously you can argue for reforms and hope that you obtain them, but in reality, unless we get rid of
I think Soraya's dropped out. Okay, so I think.
Am I back in or sorry?
Nope, you're back in.
Okay.
Yep,
So, yeah, the question of constitutional conventions like in Chile, I mean, I think you're in a very different. I'm not quite sure what John meant about that, because that was a very different. If you're talking about Chile when Allende was in power and what was going on there, is a very different state sorry, a different position, let me use that word, than we are today. So we've got to argue from where we are to where we want to get to, but confront the reality. I don't understand the reference to obviously Nick can speak for himself, but what Nick was referring to taxpayers, as in the reformists, and indeed those YourParty and the programme of Corbyn, seem to be saying that you can tax your way to a fairer society and out of capitalism. I think that was the point of referring to taxpayers, and of course that's completely unrealistic. I think that the demonstration on Saturday of the right was a chilling reminder of where the absolute betrayal of the so-called working class MPs. How many of them are working class? I don't know. And if they are, they've been sucked into, bought off. It shows where there is no alternative, people will turn to the ideas of reform and the ideas of blaming the problems that we have on asylum seekers and so on, the role that the Labour Party is playing in government, to just emphasize that, to try and out reform. I mean, I don't mean that in a positive way of reform, but a capital R. It is just, we have to organize, and I think Comrade spoke about strategy. We have to work out the strategy of how, obviously here, I say obviously, it seems a lot of us agree, but we've got to get to the ideas that we have, to get them out, to argue amongst workers and their families, because nobody else is doing it. Sorry, those on the left are, but I mean, I think we need to make sure we're out there, because if there is no alternative, people will be demoralized. They'll be out on coming out every week. And another comrade said about being demoralized and dissipated because it doesn't actually lead any. I'm not saying you shouldn't demonstrate, but it doesn't lead to an end. So we have to try and do what we can to intervene, point out, the discussion was about your party, point out what we really need in our party, and build from there.
Brilliant. Thank you, Soraya. Next up on the list is John.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
I believe that capitalism is in decline and has been since the early 70s. This neoliberalism, which Nick mentioned, I think at the end of the day, it's what Marx would say a reaction to the fallen rate of profit. That profits was fallen and they've had to try and increase it. And what they've done is there's been a shift from productive activity, industry, to finance. And that's the ultimate aim of a capitalist, is to make money from money without actually going through the process of making things. Regarding reform and Tommy Robinson and this demonstration on Saturday, I think a lot of the support for reform and Tommy Robinson is a reaction to Labour's betrayal. There's a hatred of Labour. And a question I'd like to ask Nick is, if Andy Burnham gets a seat in Parliament, because there's supposed to be a sick MP in Greater Manchester who's thinking of giving up his seat to Andy Burnham. If Andy Burnham comes back, would that have a big effect on politics if Andy Burnham replaced Starmer? Thank you.
Thanks very much, John. So I think next is Dylan.
Yeah, I think in our propaganda, we do need to mention the special crisis of British capitalism. And I think that's one of Corbyn and Zara Sultana's weak points, is that they're not very good on economics and they don't explain the special problems of British capitalism. And British capitalism has been suffering from a problem of low productivity for many decades. We've also had a crisis of investment by the capitalist class in this country. You can go back to the 1920s after the First World War, when private industry was returned back to the bosses, and those industries were in a terrible state due to the failure of the capitalist class to invest. And then in the 1920s, the solution of the capitalist class was to engage in massive wage cuts against the workers, and that led to a massive upsurge in strikes, and obviously it led on to the general strike in 1926. So we have got to point out that any left reformist programme put forward by Corbyn and Sultana is not going to be able to address the structural problems faced by British capitalism. And we've got to put those problems of British capitalism, as I mentioned earlier, in its global context. We've got a global economy that's rapidly slowing down, but it's heading towards at least a recession. But there are grave dangers that Trump's trade war could spark a global depression, because what he's doing, the tariffs that Trump's instituted, are much worse than the Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act of 1930, which massively accelerated and expanded the global depression and made it so much worse than the 1930s. What Trump's doing actually is much, much worse than the Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act of 1930. So I think we do need to reckon into that we're going into a very stormy period for capitalism on a global scale, and considering how weak British capitalism is, that's going to have grave repercussions on this country, and it's going to shake up society to its core due to the failure of the capitalist class and all the various political classes in Parliament, and including your party under Corbyn. They will not be able to deal with those grave problems. Already now there's calls within the Telegraph and other sections of capitalist media for an IMF intervention in this country. And remember, the last time the IMF intervened in this country was a Labour government in the 70s, which led to massive austerity, sparked off the winter of discontent, and that paved the way for the Thatcherite counter-revolution in the 1980s, which even now the trade unions haven't recovered from what Thatcher did in the 80s when she smashed the miners and other advanced sections of the working class. And just finally, there are a lot of illusions in the left internationally in China, because Chinese capitalism is developing at a rapid clip, unlike Western imperialist states where manufacturing is contracting and you've got societies in crisis. Chinese capitalism, without any illusions in the Stalinist bureaucracy there, is actually going forward and developing society. They've had an industrial revolution in 40 years, which is quite incredible. And if you visit China, it's like going into the future. I went to China recently, and compared to Europe and Britain and the United States, it's far, far in advance of our countries in terms of infrastructure and other high-tech industries. And there are sections of the left internationally who do have illusions within Stalinist China. So that's something that we should also bear in mind in our analysis.
Thanks very much, Dylan. So just a quick question to Tobias. I think that a hand there that was raised a moment ago. Okay, I'm going to presume not. Okay, so I think unless anyone else would like to come in at this point, I know there are a couple of points that were raised. There was a question by John and some points by Richard that were kind of expressed directly at Nick. So it'd be useful perhaps for Nick to come back in again, unless anyone else is.
Can you just sum up what John Tumman's direct question to me was? I've got Richard's.
I think it was John Smithy.
John Smithy. Oh, yes, about Andy Burnham. Andy Burnham, yeah. Okay. So is this just on this and then we're having another go, or am I?
I think we can, go on a little bit longer and then perhaps.
Yeah, sure. Well, first of all, on the question of Andy Burnham, there seems to be quite a lot of illusions in him from people that should know better. People say that he's moved to the left since he came out of Parliament. I think he's been biding his time and picking his moment to come back. But we should remember that he was a Blairite under Blair. He's a technocrat. He's not the solution. It might perk up the left, but if the left that's left in the Labour Party looking to Andy Burnham to be their left saviour, then they're in a really bad state of affairs. We should pay attention to what's going on in the Labour Party, just as we should pay attention to what's going on in all political parties, because they're of importance to class struggle. But with YourParty being launched, we need to make sure that the people are involved, that they become members, that there's a democratic structure, and that we argue for socialist politics. I think for all of the misgivings and delay, it is going to get off the ground, and it's going to be, it's going to be very big. So it gives us a big opportunity. So the next question was Richard. Well, so this is a huge question, and I know that Richard's posted a couple of questions each time I've posted an article on the website, but there's only so much that we can say in a 15 or 20-minute introduction or in a short article, and I see our task at this stage not trying to cram everything in to every speech or every article, but to do several things. Most important at this moment, I would say this will be criticized by Richard, but I think it is actually to propagandize for socialism. Socialist ideas have been put back and back and back in the working class in Britain and internationally. And if we are going to win socialist arguments inside the working class and inside your party, we have to explain what we mean by socialism. We have to explain why it's not Stalinism, why that was not socialism, and we have to argue what it could be, that it's not social democracy. So, rightly or wrongly, Richard, those are my emphases at the moment. In terms of Parliament, now I think I'll be corrected if I've got this wrong, but I believe that you come from a tradition whereby standing in elections is not seen as very important. In fact, probably dismissed from what I will call the Cliffite tradition. My position is completely different. My position is that unless the working class and the socialist or communist movement wins enough support in society to be able to win MPs and a considerable number of MPs, then we're not really anywhere near having the support in society to change it. I think there's a big difference on what I might call the Marxist or the revolutionary left about how we change society. And there are those groups that think it's going to be carried out by the leadership of a small, dedicated, revolutionary organization. And I disagree with that. And there are those of us, which is my position, who believe that the change that we need to have can only come about through the active, conscious act of the mass of the working class. That needs a party, but it's the working class that carrying out the party program that will change society. Now, what role does Parliament play? Parliament, as I wrote in an article recently, under capitalism, is a stinking corpse. It has a stench of corruption. It is a talking shop. It does not have the power really in society to implement or to make change. So if you're asking me, is that where change is going to come about? Then no, change is going to come about through the active participation in revolutionary transformation by the mass of the working class. But if you're asking me whether Parliament is irrelevant, then no, I don't think it is at all. I have no doubt that if the socialist communist movement begins to get mass support such that it is approaching, for example, a majority in Parliament, then the most likely position would be that the ruling class, if it hadn't done already, but would begin to mobilize to clamp down on democracy, on voting, on changing the rules, on talking about coups and all of this sort of stuff, as we saw under Corbyn, as we saw in Chile in 73. But in order to get to that position, we have to use the parliamentary structure and elections to local authorities and to Parliament to show that we have the support of the mass. Now, how else do we get it? Now, you talk about workers' councils and so on, and any organisation that is thrown up in the course of struggle should be welcomed and should be developed. But in my opinion, and again, Richard, I'm sure will disagree with me, the idea that we will have a sort of Soviet system or a workers' council system, it's something that I disagree with. We need to have elections, and we need to win elections, and we need to have representatives who are elected in a socialist society and can suffer defeat in a socialist society. That won't be in the Parliament as we have at the moment. It will be in a proper democratic, different, differently constituted organization, in the same way that the Paris Commune, which was a local administrative unit in French society in 1871, was used by the working class and transformed. So there's a big discussion there to have. I'm sure that we'll have to come back to this. But I'll put it this way: unless a socialist party, using socialism in the way that I mean it, unless a socialist party is winning millions upon millions upon millions of votes and is vying for power in that way, there is no prospect of the working class having the strength or the power to confront the capitalist state, to dismantle the army and the police force and all the other institutions of the capitalist class. That's a brief summary of my position. I look forward to debating it further on another occasion.
Okay, brilliant, thanks, Nick. For context, I did let Nick run on a little bit there, as I was thinking it might be that we sum up after this, but I see Sophia's got her hand up, so yeah, we'll move along to her, and then I think, unless there are kind of vastly more contributions, I think if you could very quickly sum up, Nick.
Sure.
Oh, Adam as well. Okay, yeah. So Sophia first.
I just wanted to say, I understand, like, obviously, if like society doesn't have, like, if socialists don't have enough support to win elections, they're not going to be getting anywhere. but at the same time, it's also possible to win elections without having the base, like, institutions in society that would enable exercising that power properly. And if those aren't developed as well as, or, you know, in conjunction with any kind of electoral, you know, motion, then it can just be not helpful. Anyway, that's all I want to say.
Thank you, Sophia. So I'm going to go to Adam and then George. So Adam first. Yeah.
Yeah, okay, thanks. Yeah, I agree with Nick's definition of capitalism and of how it can't be reformed into a better or more equal society. I can also agree with his definition of socialism as the common ownership and democratic control of all the means of production by society. But what I don't understand is why Nick thinks it would be possible to get Corbyn's new party to adopt socialism as its objective. I mean, I think I'm challenging the view that socialists should join the new party, because if you do, and you've just been talking about elections, I mean, they're going to be putting up candidates. Nearly all of them, I would think, are going to be left reformists or social democrats. So that will mean that Nick, as a socialist, will have to go around during election time campaigning for these people, saying vote for this reformist, even though he doesn't believe it. Or, I don't know. I mean, maybe it's or is it just an audience? Isn't Nick saying socialists should join the party just to get a bigger audience? But I think you might get more respect if you say this from outside, because if you go in and then you refuse to campaign for these people, you won't get your audience. People won't respect you. Anyway, I'm just challenging, I think, the basic assumption that socialists should join this. Socialists, in the sense that Nick means, should join this new party. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Adam. We'll bring in George now. Yeah.
Thank you. I'll be quick. I just wanted to say, firstly, on that point, I disagree. I think that, what's important that socialists do with the new party is to fight within it, to make it a party of struggle on the ground. And just for an example, we've only had a few meetings of our Stockport branch. We've already decided to do some strike solidarity work this weekend with the bus strikers, and that's the kind of thing. It's only a very, very small action, but it's the kind of thing that, shows what can be done if you have people who are dedicated activists and are committed, and we can hopefully look to expand that work massively. So, I think also it's important to use it as a platform to communicate socialist ideas to the membership of your party and to the wider public, because it's not just about necessarily what's printed on the first leaflets or whatever. It's a long struggle to convince people to adopt the right ideas, but you've got to be in it to win it, so to say. About Parliament, I just want to say, I don't know, I'm sure that this doesn't contradict what Nick thinks, but just that the elections to the current parliament as it's currently constituted are obviously heavily, they're fixed against us. And while I agree that, we will need, of course, mass support of the working class and millions of votes across the country, I would still doubt that would translate into a parliamentary majority of any kind, or the power to have a government of socialists, because the seat allocation is just so broken. But I still think I agree. We use Parliament for the reasons Nick said, to have tribunes of the people fighting for socialist ideas in that, in, I think someone said, a stinking corpse, and quite right. So yeah, that's all I want to say about that.
Thank you, George. So I think at this point, I think we probably do have time for maybe one more contribution, if anyone is kind of willing to do that. But if not, I think I will hand over to Nick to sum up, and then I'll briefly explain what the next program of discussions will be about.
Okay, Steve, thanks very much, and thanks very much for everybody for the contributions, the disagreements, the questions, the challenges. I don't think I'm going to do a particularly great job of answering all of them, but I'll do my best. And I think we'll be coming back to the themes and the questions throughout this. So there's been some stuff. I don't know if I've seen everything that was on the sidebar, but I think Pete Cooper and Frank have talked about program. So just to deal with that very briefly, when we were involved, when Talking About Socialism was involved in the forging communist unity process, we did take a breather to discuss drafting our own program. We never completed that. We pulled out of those talks, and those discussions are left in abeyance for us to go back to. That doesn't mean that we don't see the importance of a program. We do see the importance of a program, and I think that we'll probably be trying to draft a proposed program to present to your party, which will deal with demands that we should be agitating for in opposition, which set out in a sense, the terrain upon which we'll be fighting for, but which also, most importantly, set out what we would do in power, so that we explain to workers, their families and so on, exactly what we would do if we were in power. So what would socialism be? What would it mean? And how would we achieve that? And that means fighting now in the working class, alongside the working class, for every advance, every reform, whether that's in living standards, economic issues, but also the question of democracy. So, for example, now, if we won our program in your party, then representatives of your party would be calling in Parliament and in public meetings for the abolition of the monarchy, the abolition of the House of Lords, the election of all officials, the right to recall, the abolition of the army, the abolition of the police, putting such institutions under working class democratic control, and so on. So the party program is a guide to action. It's something to, in a sense, use as a way of educating followers of politics, and particularly the working class, of what we would do in power. Because basically the working class coming to power under a socialist leadership would mean completely dismantling, completely, brick by brick, every element of the capitalist state. The capitalist state has been honed for 300 to 400 years in Britain, and we need to demolish it. John Smithy talked about Karl Marx and the Paris Commune, and he's right. Marx and Engels, the only change that they said after the Paris Commune that they would make to the Communist Manifesto would be that point, that the working class cannot take hold of the instruments of the existing capitalist state and use them for their own purposes. They have to create a new state. And that's the type of state that I think needs to be set out. So proper, truly representative bodies that are both legislative and executive, not talking shops. We take the power away from the capitalist class, because that's where power resides at the moment, in the boardrooms of the companies, where they buy and discard MPs. The MPs there are seduced. Even if any of them go into Parliament with good ideas, they are suborned by the environment. And Parliament, as it exists now, is never in a million years going to transform society. So yes, we need a programme. Yes, we need a party program, and it needs to take up what we do now and what would we do in power, and how we would go from one to the other. That is the transformative nature of a revolution. And by that, I don't mean a small minority carrying out a coup or a putsch. I mean the working class in its mass, in its majority. I don't accept Richard's categorization that I ignored class struggle. I said, in fact, that the representatives of the party should take the class struggle into Parliament and into the council chamber. And I also said that we should be side by side with workers in all struggle. I didn't particularly mention any, the bin strike or in Sheffield and Birmingham, but of course, any socialist worth their salt should be side by side with workers in struggle. We should be side by side participating in the pro-Palestine events, the protests, and so on. And it's really a disgrace to the labour movement as a whole that it hasn't been able to give a lead on this. We've had march after march, but no particular action. And this is something that we need to deal with. Marches are good and marches are necessary, but they're not adequate. They're not sufficient. And that's why we need your party to develop into a party of class struggle and a party of socialism. On the question that's been raised by Adam, and it's a good question, and I can understand why Adam is raising it, we as socialists need to fight our corner. And we need to fight our corner everywhere. And we need particularly to fight our corner where the working class is and where the most advanced sections of the working class are. And at the moment, after a period of lull, we've got 800,000, possibly 1 million, certainly more looking at your party. And why are they looking at your party? Because they want answers. Now, what are those answers? Who's going to give them to them? Is it going to be the reformists, the social democrats of Jeremy Corbyn and the people that advise him? Or is it going to be socialists? Now, my attitude is that we as socialists should use whatever opportunity such has been given to us by this initiative to argue for the fundamental break with capitalism that we need if society is going to continue. Climate change threatens humanity. Third World War threatens humanity. Every single problem that we face as a human race is caused by the profit system. And we need to explain that. Wars are caused by a competition for raw materials, for strategic locations, for cheap labor to exploit. Climate change is caused because the capitalist class cares nothing for the long-term health of the environment. It wants its short-term profit. We need to be involved in those mass debates that are taking place inside this new party and try to win people to those socialist or communist ideas. And we shouldn't give ground to the social democrats and the reformists. We should fight tooth and nail on these by arguing clearly, boldly, with facts and figures, and we should try to persuade. And if we can persuade a significant number, better still, a majority, then we begin to have an impact. And we take that everywhere where the working class is, into the workplace, into the trade unions, into the tenants associations, into the schools and the colleges. And we challenge those who suggest that the system can be put to rights by a little bit of taxation. It can't. We need to expropriate the capitalist class. We need to have common democratic ownership of the means of production. And that production needs to be planned democratically, involving all through representatives who are subject to recall, and planned for the needs of all, not for profit. So we have the society that Marx envisaged, from each according to their ability to each according to their needs. That is a saying, a phrase that will find resonance because it means that nobody is prey to the vicissitudes of financial insecurity, to pollution killing their children, or threat of dying in a nuclear war. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you, Nick. And before I just quickly sum up what is on the programme for the next few months, I'll also just say thank you to everyone who has contributed either and has been watching, even if they haven't contributed. I think a lot of the kind of contributions over the video have been very good, and also there's been some very interesting discussions going on within the text chat. So I'll just briefly go over what the topics that we're going to be discussing over the next few months are. The order of these is not entirely fixed, and we are aware that, of course, developments in your party could mean that these shift and we have to perhaps change tack. But that's just the reality of the situation we're in at the moment. So the topics are as follows. So the first, which is what sort of public ownership do we need? The second is what do we do about the state? The third is what about foreign policy regarding Ukraine, Israel, Palestine, NATO, etc. The next is on climate change. And then the final three are on refugees and immigration, capitalism and inequality, so comprising sort of housing, healthcare, education, etc. And then a final discussion which will kind of draw the strands of the previous discussion together and hopefully kind of serve as a good conclusion. So I think, as mentioned previously, thank you to all for attending, and we will now finish now. So I hope everyone has a good evening. Thank you.